Hey everybody, welcome back to this live episode of Think Virtual with Jamie and myself. We're looking forward to talking with Bretton Putter of CultureGene, calling and talking to us live from Portugal. It's 2:30 p.m. there. We appreciate you taking time to talk to us. CultureGene is a culture development platform helping companies to transition effectively to remote work. Brett, I think culture, like I would think many, is critically important. The old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think is so spot on. And I'm a big believer that leaders in organizations, leaders within organizations are responsible for 95% of how the culture moves, acts, and breathes. And yet I think a lot of leaders don't own that. And that can be a very dangerous thing in businesses. So to get us kicked off, what do you think in a in a COVID world, right, and a post-COVID world? We sit here January 6, 2021. What is the most important thing any business person needs to be looking at today in regards to their culture?
So the first thing is to realize that everything has changed and we're not going back. So your culture is changing, has changed, and will continue to change. And if you haven't defined your culture pre-COVID, you really need to do that now. I think the most important thing that any business leader could do right now is understand how remote companies work. So remote companies work in a different way to co-located companies do, and that's probably the most important thing.
So let's say that I'm a business leader and my company just transitioned from a brick and mortar office where the culture was strong, but maybe, just like any other business that, I feel like a lot of businesses, it's not at the forefront, it's there, it's a word, they don't really know what to do with it. It kind of just creates itself. And so now my team is completely virtual. What tangible things need to happen in order to now consciously develop culture within an organization, but through the transition, or if a company is just like, yes, I'm a company that's kind of been floating here, just letting it happen to me rather than consciously creating it. What are tangible steps to consciously create the culture?
So the first thing to do is to understand what we had and what we've lost. So this runs quite an extensive list, but it's proximity, physical interaction and body language, immediate and reliable communication, informal communication, information dissemination happen quite naturally, creativity, brainstorming is much harder to do, informal and formal feedback don't happen that easily, recognition and reward don't happen in a group setting, and there's people's visibility and availability, the camaraderie and culture by default don't happen. So the first thing is understand what's not there anymore, and then understand how you need to adapt. And that invariably is through the values of your business. The values of your business and the mission and vision, but values in particular are the DNA of your company. They're the foundations, and they live in you and they live in your team, hopefully to a large extent if you've done a good job recruiting the right people. But it's essentially defining the values and making sure everybody is aligned with those values and fits with those values. And then it's about understanding how do we now adapt to the fact that we need more documentation, the fact that we need more process, we need more structure, we need to really work hard on developing social connection, and we need to really work on this trust and transparency and focus on outcomes, not hours. So it's where we were and what we lost, what we need to do from a values perspective, and then what remote companies do really well, which is the documentation, process, and structure point of view.
Let's talk about, I want to kind of dive into that. When it comes to documentation, creating systems, creating processes, Jack Welch has been noted multiple times by saying that the HR department is the most important department in any company because they are the department of the people. And so I want to know who creates, from your perspective, when you talk to companies, who's creating the systems and the processes and the documentation? Because typically it's whoever has the least amount to do, or they can stretch somebody the furthest. And a lot of times in a larger company, there's typically somebody, I think, in HR that would do something like this. We're seeing now virtual HR companies or virtual people like Jamie who are doing these types of things for companies. So where does the role sit, and do you have to hire it? Can it be a remote person? Does it have to be a remote HR? Who is the person that creates all of these systems processes to make sure that the culture stays in sync?
So I recommend with my clients, what I do is I ask each one of them to start with documentation. And processes drive documentation. So I ask each individual in the company to write down their most important process. What is the one thing that's the most important thing to you in how you work? So if it's sales, our sales process. If it's marketing, this is how our funnel works. If it's HR, it could be onboarding, it could be recruitment, it could be whatever. But essentially, start with the first process, and then add the documentation that you require to that process, and then link it to the people who will be associated with that process. And so most companies are not very good at documentation because people don't like doing it, and there wasn't a really good reason to do it because it kind of just happened naturally in an office-based environment. But now, if it's not documented, it means it didn't happen. And if it's not documented, it means that it's no longer an asset for the business. And if you look at a company like GitLab, they've been remote for 10 years. They've been documenting in a really clever way where each person decides, I am the owner of this document because it's important to me. These are the people I collaborate with. This is how long it's going to be maintained for, and this is the duration and purpose of the document. And you can go and have a look at that document now. The GitLab company manual is 8,100 pages long. It's on the internet. You can go and search for it, and it is an active document. There is not one single page on that document that isn't used every day by the company. It's there for you to see, and it's a beautiful thing. It's literally a work of art. And they see documentation as a core value for their business.
I love that. So I did read a little bit about how in the books that you've done and in your work, the books that you've written and in your work, you have really gone and talked to CEOs of some of these companies that have been remote for a long time. And I guess I'm wondering, from all of your research and your conversations, what are things that companies are doing really right, like this GitLab and the documentation kind of being the core foundation for them? And what are other companies that you've spoken to maybe doing wrong that people maybe aren't recognizing in their own?
I think I can start with the wrong first. What leaders aren't doing is they're not recognizing this change has happened and we're not going back. So the way I describe this is you must actually allow your people to grieve for 2019 work, because we're never going back and it's gone. We may have some of it again, but I like to say we've moved to the moon. Gravity is different. What we wear is different, and how we eat is different. It's just different, and you need to now adapt to that. And leaders are not doing this. Granted, it's a hard thing to do, to work out how to manage a fully remote business when you were all in an office, but this is what you have to get on top of. Now, there are 9 best practices that remote companies focus on. We spoke about a couple of them earlier: process, structure, documentation, social connection. The real hard thing to do, and this is really challenging, is moving from synchronous communication to asynchronous communication, where we're in a situation where not all of our communication happens by Zoom every day, but rather through written emails, documents, whatever it is. So that is a key element. What I find is the remote companies really work hard on customizing their recruitment and their onboarding processes, because those have to change because they never meet the candidates. And they really do focus on results, output, trust, and transparency. If there's transparency in the organization, there's no reason why you can't trust me. And then we trust that you will deliver on the outputs we require. So these 9 best practices really are around building a culture for remote working or hybrid working, because a lot of companies will go to hybrid, but essentially that's remote working as well.
So if somebody wanted to dive a little deeper into your work of these 9 best practices, can they find them in one of your books?
Yeah.
So culture, or tell me a little bit about that, so somebody's like, I really want more about that. I want to dive in.
That's chapter 12 of Own Your Culture.
Okay, chapter 12 of Own Your Culture. Perfect.
So Own Your Culture, really, I interviewed over 50 CEOs of high growth companies to understand what they're doing now in the trenches. So it's a very tactical book. It's not like most culture books are written about Southwest Airlines after the fact. In other words, this is our beautiful culture, and this is what it is 30 years later. But this is actually about what companies are doing day to day in the trenches to actually build and develop and learn about their culture and embed their culture. And so each chapter takes examples of what companies that I interview do to define their values, to recruit, to onboard, probation, exit interviews, and so on. And so that you could literally open the book on any page and take 4 or 5 examples, choose one, and implement it in your company right now. The remote working one is really particularly whether you're building a remote work company or a hybrid work company or an office-based company, you still need to build a strong functional culture, and that's what Own Your Culture helps you do, is build that strong functional culture.
Well, I want to dive into what emotional connection looks like in this remote culture world, or hybrid of which I think we're going to see once the vaccine and COVID begins to pass, and we see people going back to the office and hybrid models. How do you create emotional connection when there's so much remoteness? Everything that you mentioned earlier, everything has changed, and the gatherings, the impromptus, the walking to the knowledge and brainstorming you get walking to just get coffee or your mail from the mailbox. There's emotional connections happening all the time in a work environment. Very difficult to do over video and very difficult to do over Zoom. What does that look like, and how do you cultivate that?
So that's cultivated in a remote environment. That's cultivated with this different style of leadership. So remote leaders are coaches, and their job is really to facilitate you in achieving your goals and your needs. And that often results in more regular one-to-one communication, not about work. Yeah. So first of all, your leader knows what's going on about you. Secondly, these companies work really hard on building informal communication formally and allowing informal communication to happen. So what they do is they do, from morning check-ins, movie clubs, movie nights for everybody, sharing lunch, Friday drinks, social parties, fitness class and sessions. They do this on a very deliberate way, and they make it the responsibility of the whole company. Leadership doesn't just say, this is what we're going to do. They create a committee, and the committee goes out and talks to the organization and says, what should we be doing? What do you want to do? And they don't try and boil the ocean. They really don't allow small groups to form. So you could have, for example, a company like GitLab or a company like Zapier have over 100 hashtag fun channels, which could be Red Wine Lovers Society, it could be Walking the Dog Society, it could be the Parents Club, it could be various things that the small groups create those bonds that you can connect around important subject matters for you, whether it's and a company like GitLab, for example, they do talent shows, virtual home tours, coffee chats, team social calls, DJ rooms, create company songbooks, ask me anything, questionnaires. They do virtual scavenger hunts, virtual lunch tables, but they do it in a very deliberate way. It's not random, and they build this into the environment, and they allow their teams to take control of it versus the leadership team enforcing this down on the organization.
I love everything that you're talking about. Excuse me right now. I just want to rewind to the one-on-one interaction, right? I'm in a full agreement with you. I think that one-on-one connection, a lot of leaders think that the one-to-many at a group, Monday meeting does the trick, but it's that one-to-one connection, that interaction to get to know the nuances of how you can help that person in that moment, in that day, in that situation, that really connects. So but here's the problem that I see. A lot of leaders say, I just don't have time to do all that. I don't have time to connect one-on-one with all my people. To which I say a lot of times, you don't have time. You got to make the time. I mean, long story short, but so from your recommendation, how do they find the time?
So this is loop, and there is
correct.
It's a spiral basically. And so what you've got to do is you've got to have less Zoom meetings. How do you have less Zoom meetings? You start communicating asynchronously. How do you communicate asynchronously? Create more ability for documentation. then you give your team more structure. And so a company like Hotjar has
can I just say one thing? Less Zoom meetings or shorter Zoom meetings. I'm a big fan of a 30-minute meeting can usually be done in 15 minutes. A 15-minute meeting can usually be done in 7. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah. I think your point about shorter Zoom meetings is the first step. But actually, if you look at the way most remote companies that run really well work, it's 90% asynchronous. So they do not do Zoom meetings because their communication systems are so good and their documentation systems are so good that it allows that. That means that the manager's not sitting in meetings that they don't need to be in. They can now spend their time doing one-to-ones with their direct reports. So it's a brutal system that we're in that we have to slowly undo, going from being used to and designed for synchronicity to being prepared to be asynchronous, to be prepared for our business to be able to wait for the answer.
Yeah. So we're talking a lot about communication because really communication is key to culture, but talk about the tech related to that. So I'm a company who has been in the office. Now I got to figure out the tech to use, programs and software like Slack. What technology do you feel like really has worked in the companies and with the CEOs that you have interviewed?
So companies are using lots of different tools. The best way to think about this is moving from synchronous, where there is low permanence of the communication you have, to asynchronous, where there is high permanence of it remains in the company. So in order to do that, companies use forums, they use project management tools, they use Google Docs and Notion or other types of tools. On the communication side, I know a lot of companies are using a product called Donut, which is it plugs into Slack and it'll set up a coffee meeting between two random people. So there are lots of different technologies out there. I don't think any company's really nailed the presence and visibility element of it. A lot of companies are trying to do something around 3D visualization of where people are. Are you in the coffee room? Are you working? Are you in deep thought, deep flow? Are you in a meeting? So there are a couple of companies that are trying to do stuff there, but I don't see anybody who's really nailed that. There is a long list of new technologies that are going to launch because of this, and I believe that new technologies will be launched to solve these challenges. GitLab actually give away their software for free. If you want to create a GitLab type of documentation capability, you can use theirs. Or there's a company called Atlassian who do Confluent and Jira. You can use their product management tool. So there are lots of different companies, but my recommendation is that you approach this with it's not about document for the sake of documentation. It's about documentation that's important and critical to the way an individual works that they own, and then work out how to manage that. It's not this is a bit of a quagmire at the moment, but there are definitely tools out there that companies can use. I'm happy to share a list of them with you after this. But there's a lot of good stuff out there, and more will be coming.
Yeah, I love what you're. Did you have a question, Jamie?
No, no.
I love what you're talking about when it comes to the individual and the ownership, and I just want to kind of go back to the top and the leadership for a moment, because the how do you get the leadership to empower everybody to own, right? And I think that nuance is so important. I mean, empowerment to own and be not only accountable to your manager or your I hate the word boss, but your boss, but to be self-accountable.
Yeah, this is the one of the things that is definitely going to be a challenge, especially with micromanagers or more control-based leadership, hierarchical-based leadership styles.
Yeah.
If you look at remote companies, they're very flat, and most of them are hiring for what they call the self-manager. In other words, I can manage myself. I am the manager of me. I can get on with my job. And what they do is they create structures that allow you to do that. So First of all, it's not about the hours, it's about the outcomes. So we sit down and we agree a very clear outcome. What do you need to do in the next week or 6 weeks or whatever it is? And you go ahead and do it. And if you can't, come talk to me and I will help you through the elements of the outcome that you can't achieve. So I, as your manager, am now your coach. We agree what the outcome is, and I help you work through that. I help you where there are any blockers or any issues that you're not used to. This is particularly challenging now with young people, with inexperienced new employees, because they would often learn by osmosis, and osmosis is gone now. Mm-hmm. So building the right type of single player training capability in an organization, if you hire a lot of young people, is really, really crucial.
That's so interesting. I have a question about, we were talking a lot about internal culture, obviously, the culture of organization. Oftentimes I find that in companies, it doesn't match the external culture that you're trying to project out to your clients. But if you're building the foundation of your internal culture with your mission, your vision, your values, as you say, which are the most important, how do they, a company can give out this amazing vibe to their clients, and then internally it can be a soul-sucking situation for their employees. What are you seeing, and what do you say, I guess, to that?
Yeah, I think ideally your culture and brand are two sides of the same coin, mm-hmm. and your culture is essentially the base layer of how your brand is perceived. Mm-hmm. This has been a problem for many years, but actually increasingly it'll be less of a problem because companies will lose people because of this. Mm-hmm. Now that I can work pretty much with any company anywhere, I am the target of a lot more companies now. And if I feel like a second-class citizen in your organization because you do not respect remote work or you do not respect me as an individual, I won't stay in that environment for too long. And there is going to be a lot of turnover of staff because the companies that build asynchronous communication capabilities with the right documentation, the right structures, and the right processes for remote or hybrid work are going to be selling this really hard. And they are going to be like moths to a flame because people will know the difference. They will know, if I spend 9 hours staring at the screen in Zoom calls and then have to do another 6 hours to catch up on work that I was doing, what I should have been doing during the Zoom calls, I'm not going to work like that. I don't want to work like that. So I will move. I will move on. And I think this is once the companies start to move into a hybrid situation, you will see how the best, quickest organizations adapt to this and are selling it really hard. Because that's what people want to know, that they can work in a hybrid way and they are respected in that way. They don't feel like second-class citizens.
Well, and I think that's the biggest takeaway for leaders right now. Your people will leave if you don't get this right, because there are so many options for great employees and great team members. So that, that's really important to hear as somebody who's saying, but I don't have time to implement all of this.
Absolutely. Well, not only that, but they won't come. I mean, pre-COVID studies showed that 35% of American workers said that they would pass on the perfect job because the culture wasn't a fit, and close to 50% of people that are looking for a job are focused on culture, right? So, and I would say that post-COVID, those numbers are much higher because people have different lifestyle needs. Like you, who picked up and moved your family a couple of months ago from London to Portugal. Jamie, who's picking up and doing her thing. I had somebody yesterday that I interviewed who sold all of their worldly possessions. They have 4 children, house, furniture, everything, packed it in a car and a U-Haul 5x5 minivan, period. They choose where they want to go month by month. Wow. And I was talking to Jamie about it, and she said it's called like RV something or other.
There's like an RV life out there. People just take their kids, they homeschool them, they go to want to learn about the American West? Let's just go to Yellowstone National Park for a month. And I think it's amazing for somebody who can do that. Obviously, my life isn't conducive to that, but
that level of that mindset, that the energy of that, even if you can't do it, the energy of that is gonna also begin to shift cultures, I think, as well.
Completely. The cat's out of the bag when it comes
Correct.
to
Yeah.
People now realize that, look, some people are not enjoying it. Some people are struggling because they've got maybe 3 kids and they both parents have to work and they don't have any support. That's tough, and there are tough situations.
Yeah.
But the majority of people are realizing, I don't need to do 2 hours of commute to get into work. I don't need to stand under a sweaty armpit in a tube somewhere on my way to some office. I can spend, I expect that half an hour exercising or with my children and then get into work. And this is the new reality.
Yeah. You know, my piece of that, because I have my wife and I have a senior and a freshman in high school. But the other day I went through all my clothes and I gave away about 70% of everything. So I have barely anything because I wear a black t-shirt every day and black sweatpants every day. I gave away 40 dress shirts, 50 or 60 ties, every pair of my happy socks, 50 pairs. I mean, it was like, it felt great. So but I just want to go before we end, I just want to highlight your books, right? So you are the author of Culture Decks Decoded and Own Your Culture, which you talked a little bit about your books, but tell everybody who, before we move into a quick speed round, Brett, who your ideal clients are and how people can connect with you.
So my ideal clients are companies that are preparing to transition to either remote or hybrid work. The ideal client is the CEO, understands that this is really critically important, has possibly tried to do something in this space before, but it didn't land, but knows they need to do something about it. I work directly with the CEO and the COO or HR, but it's always directly with the CEO. And yeah, I'm working. I've got a client in the US. I've got a remote client. I've got a client in France. I've got a client in the UK. It's the world is flat.
You're an international culture changer.
Well, that's exactly. Yeah. And the 2 books, Culture Decks Decoded is really, I took the best culture decks online, starting with Netflix. I took Asana, LinkedIn, and took these decks and created essentially just a commentary on the best slides in these decks. So if you want to write up your culture, that's a great way to do it. If you're looking at starting to design, if you want to embed, if you want to manage your culture, then Own Your Culture is really, it's the only book I'm aware of that's been written like this, with high growth companies that are actually doing it right now.
I love it. All right. That is great. You ready for a quick speed round, Brett?
Shoot.
All right. Favorite book and why? Mine is yours.
and everyone culture. It's about deliberately developmental organizations. It's pretty much the future of culture in a very extreme way. Highly recommend if you want to see what culture could look like in 10 years time or 15 years time.
And it's called In Everyone's Culture.
And Everyone Culture, and it's by Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy.
Great.
It's a great book.
The mentor that has really defined the direction of how you've moved forward in your life.
I was very lucky. My first job was a door-to-door salesman. And I was very lucky there to have a leader who understood that I was this raw, very passionate, often very clueless and quite headstrong individual. And I was given, he gave me books, he gave me videos, his name is Gerhard. And he really set me up for everything that everything we do is selling. And he taught me leadership. He taught me how to think about things in the right way. And he started to show me that criticism could be dealt with in a really good way, because I've always had issues dealing with constructive criticism, so he really got me on the right path to dealing with that. I'm still working on it though.
You know what? I hate the term constructive criticism. I think it has such a negative tone to it. I prefer constructive feedback.
Yeah, I think
that's my 2 cents. Yeah, my 2 cents. All right, last question, Brett. What is one piece of wisdom you would give somebody today who's graduating college?
I would say to them to be patient. I wasn't. And I would say be patient and do everything, whether it's peeling potatoes or whether it's flipping burgers or whether it's running files. Just do everything you can to the best of your ability, because it prepares you for whatever's coming next.
I agree.
Be patient, but do everything as well as you can do.
It's great. Well, Brett, I appreciate you being on the show today. I appreciate all the wisdom you shared and you unpacked about the importance of culture. It is so important, more important now, I agree with you, than ever before. Studies are showing, pre-COVID studies, that 85% of the jobs that exist in the year 2030 do not exist today. And so culture is going to continually change. I think 2021, one of the things I've been telling my clients is 2021 is going to be like 12 months and 12 years. Every month is going to be a new year. We've got a new president in the United States. I think we'll know at 1 p.m. today. We have a potential, a shift of the Senate and the House. We have a stimulus package. We have jobs that are going to be coming back. We have restaurants that are going to be opening. Travel is going to be opening up. We have vaccines that are out. We have so many things. And so culture has been accelerated, in my opinion, to be number one. And people like you are helping change the world. So thank you for what you do. And I'm going to let Jamie close us out.
Just really appreciate everything you have to say. Go out and read everything that Brett has put out there. I'm saying this to the audience. Own Your Culture and Culture Decoded. And thank you for joining us from Portugal. Enjoy. And it was really nice to speak with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyed it, and have a great day.